Hey guys, this is W3C Ray, and today we want to talk about some common leaks in PKOs. I have split this into several parts, so we have several topics which we want to discuss in several parts. And let us start with the first topic, and the first topic is being too tight in the early mid stages of the tournament and way too loose at the final table when it comes to calling off all-ins. And let me start with some general informations on bounty tournaments. So the bounty, of course, gives you some additional value when it comes to an all-in situation. In this specific hand, you have an additional dollar EV. You can win directly dollars which go to your pocket. And this is reflected by an equity drop. So you need less equity to call the all-in against your opponent's range, which will translate in a wider calling range overall. And this equity drop is defined by the ratio of bounties which you can win compared to the starting stakes which you have to invest. So, for example, if you are investing one starting stack to win one start bounty or one starting stack to win two bounties, then the equity drop of those two situations will be different. In the one case, you might have an equity drop of 5% compared to the non-KO case, and in the second situation, you might have an equity drop of, let's say, 9%. So the two bounties, of course, are more valuable when you call off the all-in, so the equity drop will be bigger. Since we need less equity compared to the equity which we have in a non-KO tournament, we can also call this effect, so the equity drop by the bounty, as negative risk premium. So this risk premium concept comes out of ICM, where you will need additional equity to call off pre-flop or call off an all-in, or even in post-flop situations, you always have to regard the positive risk premium or ICM effect, and the bounty is like the counterpart, so it drops the needed equity to a lower level since you can win dollars directly in a hand. At the early stages of the tournament, this ratio of bounties to starting stakes is very often equal or in the same neighborhood. So you will very often invest, for example, one starting stack to win one start bounty, or two starting stacks to win two start bounties. Sometimes the ratio can even be way better, so you only have to invest one start stack, so you call off, for example, 5k chips in a standard stars tournament, and you can win two bounties, and so on. Deeper in the tournament, however, the ratio is usually not that good anymore, especially at the final table. Stacks are, compared to the starting stacks, very big, so you have like 100 starting stacks or 200 starting stacks, deepness of players, and the bounties are actually not that high compared to the starting stacks. So players will very often have like 15 or 20 start bounties, or 20 start bounties, for example, in the 109 PKO would be $1,000. And this is like the usual 9-800 average bounty when it comes to, for example, like Sunday PKO final tables. So what you can see is very early on in the tournament, the ratio is pretty good, or can be pretty good, and the more and more you progress throughout the tournament, the ratio of bounty and starting stack will get worse and worse. And throughout the tournament, you have this competition between the positive risk premium, or ICM, which will of course kick in at the direct money bubble, and afterwards when money is distributed out, of course the ICM effects are always there. At little pay jumps you have like little ICM peaks, and of course when it goes to the final two tables and final table, ICM will kick in very high. And on the other hand, you have this negative risk premium effect from a bounty value all the time when you can win an all-in, or also when you win a big pot, you will cover the players after the hand. This is also some big future EV impact, and those two effects are competing. At the early stage of the tournament, of course, there is nearly no ICM or no ICM effect, so the bounty value will overtake all of the possible ICM effects, and the equity drop caused by the bounty will be always negative, so you will always need less equity to call off the all-in. The more and more you progress throughout the tournament, especially at the final table, this can switch around and ICM is stronger than the bounty influence, and then you have to tighten up a lot. And now to show you what I mean by being too tight in the early mid stages of the tournament or way too loose in your calling ranges at the final table, I give you two hand examples. So this will be the first hand example. This is out of a $215 Winter Series tournament, and here we are sitting in the big blind. We will face a very common spot that a little bit over 20 big blind stack is jamming, and the question is how wide you can call. So for this very common spot, I did do the HRC simulation and I show you the results now. So this will be the first results. I made 3 different simulations to reflect the different approaches for the small blind first in jammer. So the small blind all-in jamming player, of course, can have a very diversified strategy. He can jam a little bit more, what would be like GTO or pre-flop solve approach. He can jam like Nash equilibrium, which would be the case here. So the 40.1% would be the Nash equilibrium if he can only jam. And he can do some mixed strategy in between, for example, taking out top range and jam the rest. And for this situation, we want to find out like the average range which we can call. This player has, in this case, by the way, 30k chips. This tournament did start with 50k chips, so he has around about 60% of his starting stack, and this player has 1 start bounty. So looking at the first simulation where the player jams a little bit over 40%, our 9-5 suited is not inside of the calling range. But you can already see in the suited combinations you are calling very wide. You are not folding any suited king. You are not folding king 6 offsuit, probably not even folding king 5 offsuit, since this is a little bit over 2% of aces. So this would be probably like my borderline call here, the king 5 suited. And you see overall this is a very wide calling range. And players tend to overfold this specific spot with a very high frequency, folding hands like queen 9 offsuit, folding hands like 8-6 suited. So we are keeping in mind that some of the suited 1-gappers, 2-gappers are good calls, especially in the high card of suited hands. We always have calls, and of course in the suited high cards we will also call very wide. Now we will change the situation and just say that the player is not jamming his top range. So in this case, I took out the top range for the small blind player and let him jam the rest. So essentially I let him jam the rest and only took out the aces to jacks and the ace king, ace queen suited and ace king offsuit. And in this case, we can already add 9% more range, right? So 47 to 55, so 8% more range. And in this case, 9-5 suited is in break-evenish call. So I would leave 9-5 suited out if I know or think that I know that the player is not jamming top range, but is jamming the rest, which he can jam in a Nash equilibrium. Now we are looking at the third case, and in the third case the player is only jamming hands which he is jamming in a non-KO case. Since most of the population isn't really adapting to KO cases, especially when it comes to their opening ranges, all-in jamming ranges, you will more often face like the pre-flop solved open jamming range or like the more natural open jamming range. And I already gave him some more combinations which he usually wants to limp jam or limp broke. So he is already like a little bit wider compared to the preflop solve case. And in this case we can call even wider. Of course his range is a little bit weaker and more diversified between offsuit high cards, some suited 1-gappers connectors and some low pairs. And in this case 9-5 suited becomes a very clear call. So now how to approach the spot? I would mix all the information now which I got and know, okay, in the Nash equilibrium, the 9-5 suited hand is a close minus EV combo. If I take out top range, 9-5 suited is a break-evenish combo, and if the player is using his usual strategy and probably adapts a little bit and jams a little bit more of the combinations which he usually would limp broke, then 9-5 suited becomes a clear call. And all this information put together, for me personally, puts 9-5 suited in the very bottomish combination, which I want to call here, and I did call in game and made a straight. Now in this case, when you regard that the player had 60% of his starting stack and one start bounty, in like the most cases you can call in between 50 and 60% range in this scenario. Now let us change the spot and look how much we can call in a non-KO scenario. And for this situation, I only took the situation which is the most optimal one. And the most common situation is that the player will have like a diversified strategy in the small blind, not only not jamming top range and jam the rest, or jamming top range and everything else. The player will have a distinct combination which he wants to jam, and the rest he wants to raise call, limp broke, raise fold, etc. So in the small blind he has of course a very diversified strategy. So I take this range to the comparison of the non-KO case, which you will see here. And so the player is jamming the same range, and in this case the big blind is calling 16.6%. So if you want to compare the non-bounty case to the bounty case, you add more than 300% range, and especially in all the offsuit combinations, which are 12 combinations each for every combination you put in, this is a lot of range which you want to add in this square here. So in bounty tournaments, at the very early stage of the tournament, you are broking very, very wide when it comes to all-ins, especially on blind all-ins. Now let us take the second spot, and this is the final table spot. So I will give you the payout structure here. This is a Bounty Builder 109 final table. 9th place gets $654. First place gets $9,176, and those are the bounties of the 9 remaining players at the table. And in this case, this is a hand of a user out of the Discord channel. He was the under the gun player, so he is the big chip leader on this final table, and he did open raise, and the MP1 player did rejam, and the question was if he can call his Queen Jack suited here. And to his surprise, so this is the calculation of the spot here, to his surprise he can only call 10s plus and yeah, marginally ace queen suited. But let us first look at the ranges. So for the under the gun +1 player, or our hero here, we are using this opening range. In the bounty case you can be a little bit wider, but I think it's alright. And the player out of MP is jamming here a little bit pocket eights, a little bit king queen suited, 9s plus and ace jack suited, which is already, by the way, pretty wide for an MP1 ingot against the under the gun +1 chip leader. So I think I would be a little bit tighter here, but yeah, I think that for the average population this jamming range might fit. And in this case we can only call 10s plus and yeah, close ace queen suited. And the question now is, why is the range so tight? Remember, you can win $1,022 divided by 2, so $511. And I very often hear this argumentation when I look at the pay jump. The next pay jump is round about $260. So in this case, I can win more than double the next pay jump and round about the dollar value of the next 2 pay jumps when I win the hand. And why is my calling range still so tight? And why didn't we want to snap Queen Jack suited in this scenario? So the hero did call Queen Jack suited here, and we can see Queen Jack suited is a very, very abysmal call, and he did not regard several different things. So the first thing is, of course, we are facing an MP rejam against our under the gun +1 opening range. And this range is, of course, rather tight. So we will need a decent amount of equity to call against this range. But this is only like a minor effect. The bigger effect is that the player had 430k chips in this scenario. And those 430k chips are 86 starting stacks in a Bounty Builder 109, and we can only win, let us look this up again, 1022 divided by 2. So $512, or in started bounties speaking a little bit over 20 starting bounties. So the ratio of stack which we have to invest to bounty which we can win is not very good. It's around about 1 to 4. And always when the ratio is not as good, the influence of the bounty is not as high. And when we compare the bounty calling range to the final table calling range, if this was a regular final table without any bounties which can be won, you can see this here. We are calling Jacks Plus and Ace King in this scenario with the same opening range and the same rejamming range. When you compare this again to the bounty case here, you only add tens, and if you want to, Ace Queen suited. So the ratio of starting stacks to bounty, especially at the final table, should not be underestimated. Usually at the final table, a big chunk of the regular prize pool is remaining. So in this case, it was around about 31,000, which are distributed at the final table. Meanwhile, in bounties, we had only like $8,000 left. So the ratio of regular prize pool, which will be distributed out through the payout structure, to bounty prize pool, which is distributed when you bust a player, was roundabout also 4 to 1. So the regular prize pool was way bigger. So stacks are worth a lot of dollars and the bounties are not worth that much anymore. So at the final table, keep in mind stacks are worth a lot and bounty value will decrease. Or to speak it in other words, at the final table, the ICM influence actually is pretty high and the negative risk premium, so the bounty influence, is overtaken by ICM in the very most cases. To give you a rule of thumb, in the bounty tournaments, how much more you can call, usually 9-handed. When you face stronger ranges, well, you can usually add 0.5 to 1 natural combination. And in this case, you can add, for example, tens, and if you like, to ace queen. It's a very, very close plus a V call. In the non-KO case, we did call jacks and ace king wasn't even printing that much. Here the ace king offsuit wasn't even printing that much. So if you add one more natural combination, let's say you add here ace king offsuit and tens, you're good to go. Now let us continue with the second league, which will be more money to be won always equals a wider calling range. And with more money to be won, I mean, I look at two very similar situations. I have to call off, for example, a 20 big blind shove from the button, but at the one time I can win one bounty and at the second time I can win two bounties. And in this kind of scenario, players always tend to think, okay, I can win more money. This means I have to call wider because this, for example, will increase my ROI in this specific tournament by a huge margin, or money by itself is worth more if I can win more money directly. And this is a very big fallacy. So winning a higher bounty is not the only factor to consider when it comes to an all-in situation and you think about if you want to call it off or not. We already saw this in the first point, that money by itself is not the only influencing factor. There are other things to consider. Do I have ICM? Do I have any future EV gains out of the situation? So will I still cover all the players at the table, for example, or can I apply pressure at the final table to the stack right to me by covering him? And very, very important, so the most important thing, how much stack do I have to invest to win the bounty? So please don't forget, and this is very often done, that the stack also has usually a very significant dollar value. You are participating with your stack at the payout distribution, so at the regular price pool, and your stack also, of course, participates at the bounty price pool. So the bounty price pool, of course, underlies no ICM pressure, so gaining more chips will gain you directly more dollar EV, but losing chips will lose you a lot of dollar EV when it comes to the regular price pool and the payout distribution in the regular price pool. So don't forget, your chips do have some dollar value as well in the specific hand where you can win a bounty. And to make this more plastic, I made two simulations, and I will just give you a little picture here. So this is a button open jam, and in this case the button did jam a starting stack and has one starting bounty. And in this case we are looking at a 20 big blind all in. So this will be here our starting point. The button jams 31.5%. I did not take our top range. I did just let him jam like the combinations which most of the people think are like the best combinations to jam here, and I want to look at how much range I can call in a big blind, and we will end up calling like 33%. Yeah, we will leave out a hand like Jack 10 offsuit, for example, or 7-6 suited, which is considered here calling because it's not printing enough, so we will end up with like calling 27% range here. Now if I change the scenario to the button jams again 20 big blinds, but those 20 big blinds are now two starting stacks and the button has now two start bounties instead of one, I'm interested in the calling range in the big blind when the button jams the same range. So on the right, you can see the range which you want to call against the button jam when he has double the stack and has two starting bounties, and button jams the same range. And what you can see is that our calling range in the big blind essentially stays the same. So what you can learn from this is that it's not important how much money you are winning in a certain hand. It is important how much you have to invest to win this money. So the ratio of bounty to stack is the key factor when it comes to the evaluation of how much equity do you need to call off the all-in and what the resulting range is. And I think this example here is very classic. It shows you that the pure money number by itself doesn't have any meaning. You always have to put this money number in comparison to the stack which you have to invest, and then you can give a very good answer on how much equity do you need and how much range you can call against the all-in range. This is what I wanted to share with you today. Good luck at the tables, guys. See you there, and bye bye.